It is the Middle Jurassic, 164 million years ago. China at this time is mostly covered by dense, humid conifer forests. The canopy is so thick, sunlight barely breaks through, and the ferns and horsetails that make up the forest floor are so dense, it makes moving restrictive for medium or large animals. This jungle teems with life. Multiple species of pterosaur dart between the trees, dancing through the air, while small dinosaurs and mammals forage through the undergrowth and dash up the towering trees. Halfway up one of these trees, there is a loud argument going on between two of the residents. 4 long tail feathers stick out of a hole in the tree, where the sound of screeching is coming from. Then the backside the tail feathers are attached to reverse out of the hole, followed by the legs and eventually the rest of the body, revealing one of the strangest dinosaurs of the entire Jurassic. Epidexipteryx has feathers like a bird, wings like a bat, and the short, toothy face of a horror. Though being the size of a magpie, he's not good at intimidating much. Fanning out his long fingers and spreading the thin membranous wings that run along his arms, the Epidexipteryx screeches harshly at the resident of the hole he has decided to take a peek in. Out of the hole comes the head of a very angry Epidexipteryx. This 20-centimeter mammal was asleep when the dinosaur invaded his home, and is now hissing and lunging at him, forcing the intruder to back up along the branch. Mammals don't often get much larger than this, and it's only against dinosaurs of similar size that they can afford to fight back against the more dominant reptiles. The Epidexipteryx doesn't come out of the tree, as it has a flight membrane that runs along most of its body, like a modern colugo, so climbing along branches is a bit difficult. The Epidexipteryx gets the hint, however, and moves further down the branch to where he can get far away from the tree's occupant. Venturing to a lower branch, he sees a flock of Tanyu long, walking along the forest floor, their heads randomly appearing from below the leaves and stems, searching for the vegetation they prefer to eat and keeping a lookout for danger. The Epidexipteryx opens up his wings and stretches out his wing membranes for the first time in hours. Perched on his branch, he could almost be mistaken for a tiny dragon. Aiming for the glistening reflected light that indicates a creek, the tiny dinosaur jumps off the branch, spreads his wings, and glides through the air. He belongs to a family called the Scansoriopterigids, and like the rest of them, is not capable of powered flight. However, when it comes to gliding through the air, they are competent, though only over relatively short distances. How far they travel is more based on the height that they take off from. Turning and landing are skills they have to develop through their life. This male has gotten the basics down, and some of the Tanyu Long's heads swivel on their necks as they follow his descent through the air. His eyes fixed on the water not far ahead, he barely notices something sailing through the air, seemingly coming right at him. Shifting his focus, the male quickly realizes what it is. It is another gliding creature. In fact, it is another gliding mammal. This is Epidexipteryx, another tiny arboreal carnivore, even smaller than the Epidexipteryx, but with skin membranes more like those of flying squirrels. Normally, they aren't active until the sun is fully set, but this one is up early, and has unknowingly begun his own glide on an intercept course with the airborne Epidexipteryx. Both gliding animals' eyes dart around, neither sure what to do, so they rapidly got closer and closer, and it looked like there was going to be a late afternoon mid-air crash. Right before this happened, the mammal bared its fangs, and this was enough for the tiny dinosaur to flinch, ducking down and shortening his flight. The Epidexipteryx continues his flight, latching onto the tree he was aiming for, exactly where he planned. The Epidexipteryx, however, is forced to pull his head up and flap his wings hastily. His feet hit the leaf litter, and he stumbles forward, unable to slow himself, and almost running headfirst into a stone. Fortunately, he stops right before hitting it, and folds up his fingers and wings, heart still racing. His heart rate only gets faster when the rock he nearly hit shifts slightly, and a long pointed head lifts up from behind it. A groggy Monolophosaurus looks around with half-open eyes, having just been woken up by the near-crash landing of the Epidexipteryx. The 5-meter predator lazily scans his surroundings, the sun rays making the single crest on his snout bright into a deep red. The Epidexipteryx stands completely still as the Monolophosaurus turns his head a few more times, and then deciding whatever woke him wasn't worth it, tucks in his head and with an exhale falls back to sleep. About a minute later, the Epidexipteryx has made it to the creek. Normally, he hunts insects and small reptiles, but the waterways that cut through his home are full of another food source, amphibians. But today he can't find any, and so he follows the fast-flowing water until it opens up into a stream. Now with less foliage obscuring his vision, the hungry Scansoriopterid can now see a group of pterosaurs wading through the shallow water. These are Lepidodactylus, and they have specialized beaks and teeth that allow them to sieve through the water to catch small prey, filtering out the water as they clack their jaws together in rapid succession. The Epidexipteryx is after a single catch, and as he walks along the rocky bank, he picks out a target. Just beneath the surface, barely visible against the stone it has perched on, is a salamander, Tunurptodon. He has found his next meal, now to get close enough to catch it. The Epidexipteryx spread its wings out again, but this time holding them flat, gripping the tips of his claws over the edge of a rock, lowering himself into a striking position. Neither predator or prey move for a long time. They only sound the flowing water and the distant calls of pterosaurs and primitive birds. In a flash, the Epidexipteryx launches forward headfirst, snapping his jaws at the salamander's head. The amphibian doesn't get a chance to swim away, and is grasped by the small carnivore's jaws. His quick launch means half his body gets submerged in the water, but when he rises, he has the struggling Tunurptodon secured in his long, dagger-like teeth. Grabbing his prey's flapping tail with his long fingers, the Epidexipteryx wades back to the shore and pins his prize under one foot. He then pecks at the still-living amphibian, pulling at the gills. Overhead, a trio of Darwinopteryx soar through the air at speeds the Epidexipteryx could never match, and he realizes that his spot is too open. Pulling his prize to the cover of the ferns, he will eat what he can before retreating back to the canopy. This is a crowded forest for all the minute residents, and there are plenty of things that could make easy work of something as light and delicate as a lone Epidexipteryx. Hello fellow travelers and welcome back. Today we will be breaking down a dinosaur that I know I will be pronouncing incorrectly every time I try to pronounce it during recording. Epidexipteryx. The first and only remains attributed to Epidexipteryx is a fossil discovered in the Liaohunggong beds of China. It was named in 2008 as Epidexipteryx huai, the genus name meaning display feather or display dragon, and the species name being after paleomammologist Hu Yaoming. It belonged to a family known as the Scansoriopterigidae, and lived in what is now China during the Calovian of the Middle Jurassic, about 164 million years ago. The fossil is mostly complete, only missing a few elements of the tail, hand, legs, and feet. It measured between 25 and 30 centimeters, not including the tail feathers, though it wasn't fully grown when it died, so may have been slightly larger as an adult. It is estimated to have weighed between 160 and 220 grams, making it about the size of a pigeon. Just looking at the skeleton, we can see it has some pretty wacky proportions for a theropod, from the short skull, the lengthy arms, and the short tail. So let's break it down in more detail. Starting with the skull, it was tall and blunt, similar to some oviraptors. It had a massive orbital opening, which could potentially mean it had large eyes in comparison to its body size. It also had a large mandible fenestra in the lower jaw, likely to reduce the weight of the skull. The teeth were large and restricted to the front half of the jaws, the largest of which were in the front of the lower jaw, which turned sharply downwards, while the upper jaw had a slight upwards curve so that all the teeth could interlock and allow the jaws to be closed. Both the upper arm and lower arm of Epidexipteryx were very long and had 3 also very long fingers, and unlike in any other dinosaur family, the third finger was the longest, each tip with a curved claw. The anatomy of the hips was also unique in its family, as the pubis was shorter than the ischium, and the ischium itself curved upwards back towards the tail. Having quite a small tail, it had a lower number of caudal vertebrae, but the last few formed into a pygostyle, which is a structure some modern birds have as an anchor for large tail feathers. We know for sure Epidexipteryx had tail feathers as they were preserved in the fossil. 4 of them jutted out from the tail and were almost the length of the animal's entire body. What was most unusual about them was they weren't built like the flight feathers of modern birds. Most feathers have a central rachis or shaft, which the tiny barbs spread out from, but in Epidexipteryx the veins weren't multiple tiny groups, but a singular sheet of keratin that is described as being almost ribbon-like. The body also had feathers, though these were a more primitive form of feather, as they did have a membranous base, but a more barb-like body. Epidexipteryx is the oldest known dinosaur to have ornamental feathers. In fact, it's the earliest known animal found with ornamental feathers, being even older than the famous first bird, Archaeopteryx. We can see in both the long tail feathers and the short body feathers of Epidexipteryx what the early evolution of feathery integument looked like, or at least how they evolved in one line of theropod dinosaurs. And boy was the family that Epidexipteryx belonged to unique. As said earlier, they were the Scansoriopterigidae, of which there were 4 genera, all of which lived in a relatively small part of China, and only between 165 and 156 million years ago. They were always seen as a little bit strange, not just because of their size, but because of the long arms and digits they had, and it was hypothesized that these were arboreal insectivores, spending most of their lives in trees hunting tiny prey. It was even thought they used their long fingers, similar to modern eyes, to search for and extract insects from within trees and crevices. But we were missing something important, and it wasn't until the naming of the genus Yichi in 2015 that it all made sense. The fossil of Yichi had so much detail that it even preserved the impressions of wing membranes between the elongated fingers and down the body. With the discovery of Amberopteryx in the same year, which also had wing membranes, this is ample reason to believe that the other members of Scansoriopterigidae also had these features. Scansoriopterids were in some way dinosaur bats, with the thin skin stretched between the digits, unlike in pterosaurs where they only extend from the 4th finger down the body. Unlike bats or pterosaurs, they weren't capable of powered flight, and were only able to glide through the air, similar to sugar gliders, flying squirrels, and colugos. As far as we know, the Scansoriopterigidae were the only dinosaur family to develop membranous wings. Flight developed in dinosaurs multiple times, and given enough time, these small little tree climbers may have also evolved true powered flight like pterosaurs and bats. However, they seem to have gone extinct before that ever happened. We also know that the wing membranes themselves had a layer of downy or fuzzy feathers on them, again, more like what we see with gliding mammals more than bats and pterosaurs. Epidexipteryx had to share the air it glided when it was alive, however, as there were many other creatures it lived alongside that could both glide and fly. Not only were there other Scansoriopterigids, like Scansoriopteryx itself, and Pedopenia, which may or may not be a member of this family, but multiple pterosaur families from small Agnoronathids to the more standard-looking Darwinopterids, and even a few mammals that could have been capable of gliding. The space between the trees in that forest must have been very crowded. Epidexipteryx likely spent the majority of its life in the trees, hunting insects, small reptiles, and the young of other small animals. Its gliding would have been mostly to avoid predators and get from one tree to another, so it didn't waste time and energy going down a tree, walking to another, and then climbing up again, while having the added benefit of avoiding terrestrial predators entirely. Its main competition would have been from other arboreal dinosaurs, arboreal mammals of similar size, and pterosaurs, who, with their powered flight, could have ambushed them from multiple angles, even when they were in the trees, or plucked them out of the air while they were gliding. It's possible it never needed to go to land, as it may have evolved adaptations to get all the water it needed from its food, nested in trees, etc. How much of a hindrance its wings were when climbing up trees or running along the ground isn't known for sure, and would depend on how well they could tuck in their fingers, plus the membranes when they weren't in use, something that is far easier to do with feathers than skin and bone. Epidexipteryx was a very strange dinosaur, living at a very strange time, as when it was alive, it is thought the dinosaurs in general were going through a long period of expansion and radiation, not just in terms of spreading out across the globe, but varying into the many families that we see in the late Jurassic and Cretaceous. The Scansauropterids were just one of those radiations, and they lived alongside other small dinosaur species that were adapting feathers for gliding and eventually flight, leading to birds. Yet they seem to have only been around for a relatively short amount of time, and have only been found in China. In fact, some labelled this particular line of evolution as an inevitable dead end. Even if they only lasted for a relatively short amount of time, Epidexipteryx and its relatives are some of the most unique dinosaurs in the entire fossil record. To think that there was this small family of long-limbed, short-faced, bat-winged little terrors gliding around this one region of the planet, along with everything else gliding in the skies. It must have been one of the world's most obscure and fascinating forests. But what do you think of Epidexipteryx? And for my question of the week, would you like me to cover another of this family, or do a family on Scansauropterigidae as a whole next time I do an episode covering these crazy little dragon wannabes? What lesser known dinosaur would you like me to do a breakdown on next? And until then, please like, share, subscribe, and thank you for watching. Okay, so you know how I said I would muck up on its name when I was recording? I didn't once. Not once. I can't believe it. Oh my god, I mess up every single name. I can't believe I did it. I'm so good.